Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
G'day, how you going? Phil Tarrant. I'm the host of the Smart Property Investment Show. Hope you're well. Quite a interesting discussion today. I've had this in the back pocket for a little while, wanting to get my guests into the studio to give some sense for what's happening in New South Wales when it comes to some of the changes to the Rental Tenancy Act. You would have heard me talk about this late last year. I had some discussions and conversations around it where there was a whole bunch of changes being tabled that will take place in New South Wales. And this would have been probably August or September of last year. I was having these discussions, giving some sense to what some of these changes would be. From what I understand, these changes are now just around the corner. We've spoken about it. We discussed it on Smart Property Investment. And it essentially changes to the Rental Tenancy Act. So it's going to change the way in which property investors will hold property in New South Wales moving forward. We could probably look to Victoria for some examples of how that's actually taken place and some of the negative impact on the rental economy as a result of it, particularly a lot of property investors moving out of the Melbourne market elsewhere because of excessive taxes and other rules that have been put in place to actually shape the way in which you can hold property in Victoria. So I really wanted to get a sense of what is actually happening in New South Wales. There's some misinformation out there in the market, so I actually wanted to go to the source and get the facts. So I thought the best person to bring to the studio was the CEO of the Real Estate Institute in New South Wales. That's Tim McKibbin. He's joining me in the studio. We're going to get stuck into it. What are these changes in the Rental Tenancy Act? What investors can expect moving forward? And I know the NSW is doing some interesting work advocating, supporting the property sector, particularly for property managers and also investors here. So we'll get into that. Tim, how you going? You well?
Yeah, good, Phil. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
It's good to see you. You've been in the helm of the NSW for a while now?
Clocked over 20 years last October.
20 years? Wow. Okay. Things changed much in 20 years?
Yeah, well, as much as it changes, it stays the same. So on the topic we're talking about today, I've been on the journey of constant erosion of the rights of landlords, and the data is pretty clear what that's doing.
So is it hard to be a landlord today in New South Wales than what it was 20 years ago when you joined NSW?
Absolutely.
Okay. And is that just onerous red tape and regulation?
Yeah, so every time government gets involved in this, they erode the rights of landlords, and then in addition to that, they place penalties on landlords if you don't do this and don't do that. So it's just getting too hard. And as we like to say to government, and I think we are the only participant in the debate, in the discussion, that represents the entire market. Other people come in there representing just one stakeholder group, and I think that makes them dangerous. So we have plenty of people representing tenants, and they constantly win the argument, and they have done for as long as I've been at the REI. But you have to say, are they winning? Because if the landlords leave the market, and they are, then is there a win for tenants? And my argument is no. I think the casualty of these victories that the tenants' representative bodies are going to claim will actually harm tenants.
Okay, so there's quite a lot there, Tim. And the sentiment is, look, I don't think there's anyone who doesn't think that tenants of investor property don't have certain rights. There's obligations on behalf of landlords to ensure they provide rental accommodation which is safe and secure and gives some sense for its continuity. I don't know a landlord that wouldn't assume that. Now, some landlords maybe haven't behaved the best in the past, and I think that was the fringes, but often they regulate for the fringes rather than the masses. Maybe that's something we can chat about. But can you tell me what the REI NSW does? So you represent the property investment sector, so that would be people that work in and around property and property investment, real estate agents, property managers, and also landlords? What's your constituent base?
We see our role as to represent the market holistically. So unless everybody wins, no one wins. So we have to look at that. But to go back to your earlier point, an investor wants three things, and what they want is their asset protected. They want the maximum, and I'll underscore that, annual return, and they want the maximum capital growth. Now, if I bought shares in the Commonwealth Bank and I said that's my goal, nobody would have a problem. If I buy a residential rental property and I say that is my goal, then all of a sudden I get demonised. And I also agree with what you said about policy by minority issues. There seems to be this philosophy that landlords buy properties and turf their tenants out. That's ludicrous. Nobody wants a vacant rental property. So again, we're looking at very, very few incidences where government is trying to solve that problem, and they're doing it with a sledgehammer, and they'll do far more harm than good. We want tenants in properties as investors.
So the challenge we have is, how do you help shape the decision-making or influence the decision-making of those people that make decisions in regards to the rules that govern property investment? Now, we've got a very friendly audience for this. They're all property investors tuning in. This is the many tens of thousands of people that tune into this podcast. They'll all probably be saying the same things, as in, we don't want our investment eroded to those three core outcomes that people want as a result of government meddling in the rules that govern property investment. Again, I note that we need to have rules that stipulate the way in which this takes place. Now, a third of Australians rent, so that means those rental properties largely are provided by, inverted commas, mum and dad property investors, because we don't yet really have this cadence of, a build to rent type scenario here, which is coming in. We'll have a chat about that. So most property investors I know are hard-working Aussies trying to get ahead and create some wealth by investing in property investment being an asset to do so. But it's one of those areas where it's largely that stipulated the rules around it typically benefit other people than property investors. So your job is to actually be a voice to regulate. Is that a main thing to actually like?
No. I see us as the voice of reason, because if we don't halt some of this activity, and to be frank with you, we don't halt much of it. If we don't do that, then people will leave this area of investment. People are, and the data is indicating that now. People are leaving this market. They're either getting into other investment opportunities, or quite a lot of people are moving their property, if you're in a tourist area, into the holiday and short-term rental market, where you have greater control of your property. And in that respect, they're trying to punish people back into the residential rental market, which I find interesting in itself. But that is our problem. People are leaving this market, and as I always like to say to people, you cannot be a tenant unless you have a landlord, and you cannot be a landlord unless you make an investment decision. And people are making investment decisions that are not going to see tenants in properties.
Yeah, I think one of the key problems we have is certainly a lack of education around how property investment works. And again, we have a lot of people here tuning in for the purpose of learning how to invest in property, create wealth through property. But you ask most Australians, and they think property investors are very rich and the government gives them money to offset any losses they have in and around property investment, that being negative gearing. And I would probably mention that there's a lot of people in and around the media that really don't understand this either, which exacerbates the misinformation, which is taken on by renters as gospel, and they spout and promote this misinformation all over the place. No doubt they have their bodies that support them in front of government to change the regulations to better support renters. Now, why is the demonisation of property investors now a national sport?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a lot of this is driven by government and government's failure to be able to put affordable housing out there. People years ago, so back in my era, the great Australian dream, the ability to be able to buy a home, was something like about 7 or 8 times the average wage, and now it's around about 14 times the average wage. So when we say the kids of today can't, they don't want to own a home, they can't own homes. The problem is supply of property, and the problem is the impediments to getting supply there, and the problem is taxes. Now, government says we've got all these issues with housing, but very few people realise that within the price of a new property, 40% of that is government taxes and charges. So I can do the numbers in my head. If somebody was to buy $1 million property, and frankly, it's pretty hard to do that. If I were to buy $1 million property, $400,000 of that is government taxes and charges. Now, I struggle here, Phil. Government says, we want affordable housing. And we say, great. And they load the price by 40%. So I understand negative gearing. It is not the enemy. But $400,000 worth of increase of the price, that's the enemy.
It's the great irony in many ways when you think of that. The government and typically property legislation. Let's talk about this very quickly. Is governed or regulated at a state-based level. There's no national regulation around it, other than as property investors, you have negative gearing and whatnot, which is at a federal level. So every state has its own rules around it, and they have big aspects of the government is directly orientated towards the property economy. So what you're saying is that on one hand, the government says we need more affordable housing. We need to make housing more accessible to more people. We need to ensure people aren't living in their cars because they can have access to rental property. On one hand, they're saying this. And on the other hand, the majority of the income generated by the government, state governments, is through property-related taxes.
Correct.
So it's either at a purchasing point, they get stamp duty, or for holding costs, they get land tax, and then there's everything else connected in with the actual build of a property that they're earning off that as well. So they're sort of compromised in many ways.
Yeah, 100%. It's crazy. The other thing, and I experienced this on this weekend actually, like you probably, I have real difficulty walking past an open home. I feel the magnet pull me inside. So I went into a development very close to us here in North Sydney, and I got talking to the developer in there, and the developer said to me, we're a bit late coming to market. We had this plan, had that plan. Took 2 years to get the approval. And one court session at the Land and Environment Court got involved before they got their approval. Now, bear in mind that the developer has to make money. So all of those court proceedings, all of those delays, everything that went into that is ultimately paid by the property consumer. That's who ultimately pays it. So, and there's no way other than that to look at it.
So what's gone wrong along the way in relation to property and the creation of property? And I think what I'm hearing from you is that the key way to resolve concerns around housing accessibility, housing affordability is increasing the supply side of things, right?
It's the only answer.
It's the only answer. So what's happened along the way? Why has the development aspect of property investment been so overburdened by red tape around development applications? Like, I just, again, it's one of the great ironies as well.
Yeah, it is. I think the answer partly is because property, or as they like to call it, shelter is one of the three must-haves as a human being. We've got to have food, we've got to have water, and we've got to have shelter. So that makes it a very special asset. And there's in certain areas in Sydney, there are the NIMBYs that we've heard of constantly, and they have driven policy with their local councils. But there's now a new group that is just sticking their heads up, but growing in numbers, and they're the YIMBYs, which is, yes, in my backyard, for those that weren't aware. And their voice is growing. So we need to be looking at smarter developments. I know that's a bit of a throwaway line, but what I'm saying is higher density, high quality. High quality, higher density near transport routes, so railway stations, the metro, this sort of thing. So a perfect development, in my mind, puts the argument you don't need a car. And I've seen developments where the development itself will own half a dozen cars, and you go and rent one if you need it. Now that's terrific. Takes the cars off the road, gives people their accommodation. Now again, back 1,000 years ago, when I was looking to buy a home, everybody had the quarter-acre block for a freestanding home. People want a variety of choice now. I live in a strata complex, and I wouldn't live anywhere else. I don't want to mow lawns on weekends. So it's not a one-size-fits-all anymore, and we have to recognise that.
Well, one of the greatest challenges I think Australia has in relation to property is the change of attitudes and expectations that it's the right and obligation of every Australian to, number one, own their own home, and number two, to own the home in a place where they want to live. It seems as though there's been a disconnect between what is reality and where the compromise takes place. And that's more of a cultural thing, right?
Yeah.
That's an issue. And Australia is changing. The way we live is changing. The makeup of Australia is absolutely changing, where a lot of people who are choosing Australia to be the new home, that they want to live in unit accommodation. They want to live in high-rise blocks because that's how they've always done it themselves. My view of all of this, and maybe give a lens to this, is that one of the biggest challenge we have with housing and creating housing, the rental economy or the property economy in Australia, is probably productivity is the biggest issue. I think the productivity issue is at the core inherent within government, because we spoke about developments not being able to go through because of red tape and regulation and the onerous process for getting that done. You've certainly got state governments, which, and I don't know the numbers, but I imagine it's huge, where a lot of the people connected with the state government is probably inherently connected with the delivery or the administration of the property economy in and around the state. I reckon the Productivity Commissioner needs to have a really good look at this aspect of state governments around productivity and property, and I reckon you could facilitate that really quickly. You probably have a view on that. Productivity, is that the key thing, Tim?
Yeah, I guess productivity goes across quite a lot of areas, and if we look at the consent authorities or the council, if you wish, their productivity level there is appalling. You know, you're taking 2 or 3 years to get approval to do certain, to actually do the building. It is quite regular that the time to build the property is way less than the time that it takes to get a yes, you can build it. And my view is that, like they've done in Victoria, what New South Wales needs to do is to say to the council, here are our expectations of you. Now, you either deliver or we will take planning from you. So here's your chance. And I like that idea because the result is in the hands of the council. The other thing I would like to see is councils saying this is the development we're trying to attract. This is what we want. Now, if you come to us with the development that we have published, we say that this is what we want, and it complies with that, then fast track it through. Let's get on with it. We need more homes.
We need more homes, and it was only just recently, last week or so, there was whole changes to zoning in and around transport hubs in New South Wales. That's correct. That should help support, changes in the density or the ability to build. But again, it comes down to the cost to build outweighs sometimes the benefits from it.
Yeah, I think coming out of COVID, and I don't have a lot of visibility on this, but coming out of COVID, we had problems trying to attract tradespeople. I think they're in high demand, and also a lot of the materials. But I'm sitting on the sidelines with that one. I only hear that in the news, but that seems to be another problem that we're facing.
Yeah, and the changes to zoning, do you think that's a good idea for sort of infill around? That's sort of really bucking the NIMBYisms to YIMBYism, yes, in my backyard, people?
Yeah. Look, I absolutely. I mean, I think that up and down the major transport routes is got to be where we've got to go, and that makes perfect sense to me. And if councils are looking to resist that, then they need to be pushed aside. I'm sorry, and it may be controversial, but we have to look beyond a one group of people in the community. We have to look at the entire community, and that makes sense to be able to put more property in the market, smarter property in the market, and it has to happen.
So the challenge for property investors is, they do their maths and their assessment on the property, and they work out whether it's good to buy or not, and then they can get appreciation and understanding of it. And then what happens is that starts layering in change, and it gets more and more expensive to hold a property. Insurance goes up. There's restrictions on how often you can increase the rent. There's restrictions on, coming in no grounds eviction, where it becomes, it's just too hard to do this anymore. And when it gets to a point where you just go, it's just not worth it. And we're seeing that sort of taking place generalising in Victoria at the moment, where the cost to hold the property and the onerous nature of that and the uncertainty around it just become too much that investors have left the market. Now, we have the changes to the Rental Tenancy Act coming into New South Wales. Can you give me some sense for maybe some details around what those changes are and if and when? I think it's a when they're going to take place.
So we've had in the legislation which went through late last year, there's restrictions now on how often you can increase the rent. So it's annually. But the more controversial ones are coming through, and it should be the next couple of months. We don't know. We have closely participated in submissions about the impact of these two things. One of them is going to be pets. So the landlord will not be able to say no to a pet or pets, plural, and no grounds evictions. So the no grounds eviction has got a bad rap, but let's look at that. No grounds evictions is not no notice, and it never was. So when you say I want my property back, you give 90 days notice. And again, if I want my property back and I want my tenant out, that's a bad financial outcome for me. So 99.9% of people that want their property back want it back for a very, very good reason. So again, I think the pets and I think the no grounds evictions certainly is not going to drive the investment we need. The unknown here is how damaging it's going to be. Now, if I'm looking at Victoria as a guide, it's been quite damaging there. If we go back in time a little bit further in New Zealand where they introduced it and how damaging it was there, and then what they had to do in New Zealand, the government embarrassingly had to reverse that very issue, no grounds, to attract investment back into the market. So the bookies will be out on this here in New South Wales. How long before the market is so badly damaged that we're going to have to reverse this and bring investors back in?
So no grounds evictions in New South Wales when it comes in, you can still take your property back under certain conditions. You just can't throw someone out because you feel like it.
I object to that expression, throwing somebody out. But
I
know that
it's colloquial.
Colloquial. That's fine. But you will have to provide the reason. So you will say, I want my property back because.
Okay. I'm selling it, or I need to move back into it.
Yeah. And you'll have to provide evidence to the tenant of why you want it back. So I would have thought that a statute declaration would be sufficient.
Yeah.
But what's being requested is going to be a lot more than that. And I would go as far as to say a lot of it, as far as I'm concerned, is quite intrusive in a personal life to be able to have to justify why you want your property back.
So the proponents or advocates of no grounds eviction would be, a group of people who have shaped and influenced government decision-making around it. What are they trying to achieve? Who's behind it? Who's behind that? Who actually said this is such an issue, we need to change the rules around it?
I think there is some policy side of it. Again, I said to you a second ago that property is one of those three must-haves. So it is very political, and as a consequence of that, government has to be seen to be active in this space, and they're not leading it, they're following it. So people are saying, I want a pet, I'm not happy, government wants to be popular, that's how you win government. So we'll bring this in. And the tenant representative bodies are very loud. But to give you an insight, and this troubled me last week, there was a press release put out by government about bidding, so rent bidding, and they proudly announced that they had fixed the rent bidding problem, and that sounds great, looks good in a media release. Problem is that landlords and agents they don't participate in rent bidding. That is driven by tenants desperate to get a property. When the tenants turn up for an open, there's 50 other people down the street trying to get in to see the property. They realise that they are going to have to distinguish themselves in that competition, so they offer more. And so it is a tenant-driven activity, not something driven by agents or landlords. Now, in that press release, and you might think I'm being a little bit sensitive here, overly sensitive, but they didn't call the landlord or the investor. They didn't use either of those terms. They called them the residential rental provider. And that troubles me if that's how they're looking at landlords as investors. They're just a provider of this property. They're not. They are an investor, and they want the maximum return they can get.
And it's okay for an investor to do that. And I always say that, that I don't think there's any obligation on behalf of any landlord to not provide a property that's not at market rent. And you get a lot of people saying, I'll do it under market rent because they're a nice person, whatever. It's an investment, and to your point earlier around, would you have the same sentiment towards CBA? You want the maximum return from your investment. It should be market. You can't get it should be market. But it always seems as though any discussion around real estate, it's the real estate professional or the investor who's also always seen in a negative light. Whether it's in real estate rental transactions or real estate sales transaction, real estate agents are always painted in a pretty negative light still.
Yeah, and that's really, really sad. And right now is a really good time to be thinking about that, because I know up in northern New South Wales and in Queensland there, southern Queensland, how hard the property managers are working right now, dealing with tenants' problems. Trying to get repairs done. There's a lot of competition for tradespeople, obviously, and working so hard in that space. But that never gets recognised. I always am entertained. Not entertained is probably not the right word, but I have to agree, sadly, that agents do have a bad reputation. But when you speak to people, they will say to you, "Oh, yes, they're all bad." But with the exception of the guy up in our suburb, he's really, really nice. That's the exception. And you'll also hear about certain religious convictions of people. They're all bad except for the guy in the dry cleaners, or this particular coming from this country. They're all bad excepting for the guy in the newsagents. And the reality of it is, the vast majority of them are very hard-working, decent people and important members of the community. But unfortunately, we're dealing with that reputational issue.
Well, I'm happy to report, Tim, that journalists typically rate under real estate professionals for reputation. So I think we're probably tarnished with even a worse brush. But you make a really important point around property managers and it being a very central role in shaping the voice of the tenant, the advocacy of the tenant, and also the advocacy of the landlord. Let's chat about that, but we'll just go to another break. Stay with us. Tim, is property management at crisis point? And by that I mean, for those of you who are investors and you work with property managers, it's a tough job. It's a tough job being a property manager. And from what I understand, we're short of property managers in Australia. We're not attracting enough people into as a profession, and it's pretty hard work. And I know you guys do a lot of work around PMs and the health and happiness of the sector and how it will shape and evolve in time. But why don't property managers get the love they should get?
They spend their life with problems. That's their world. They if you have a tenant that doesn't ring you and say the hot water system's broken or something along those lines, you've got to fix this, or they've paid their rent on time, job's pretty easy. But that's not how it works, and they are managing a book, sometimes 120 or 160 properties, and that's a heck of a lot of work. They are very much efficient in everything they do, or they just don't survive in that role. We lost around about 20% of our property managers during COVID.
Okay.
Yeah, 20%, because you can imagine during COVID we had people unable to pay the rent. We had landlords coming to property managers and saying, well, where's my rent? And they're sitting in the middle getting hammered from both sides. We got so concerned about the mental health of property managers during COVID that we declared a National Property Managers Day. a celebration of property managers. And we chose the 24th of July, which signified 24/7, which was what property managers were working around that time. And as I said to you, we lost 20% of our property managers. We really haven't clawed that back. A good property manager is worth their weight in gold right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those property investors out there, and I speak about this sometimes, be nice to your property manager as well. They're working for you, but they've got a very busy and sometimes uncertain job. Stuff pops up all the time. You know, you mentioned what's happening up in Queensland right now. They're going to be on the front line for property investors and tenants in relation to mitigating or minimising some of the impacts of the storm, and also remedies around it with coordinating trades and elsewise. It is a tough job. It's a really, really tough job. And when you get a sense for how often the rules change, the government regulation changes around it, they've got to be on it. You know, to keep up with those changes is tough, and they need to interpret it and educate investors around it, and also tenants. So what do you think? How can we get more people into property management, do you reckon?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know. That's a terrible answer for someone that's had 20 years to think about it. But it is such a hard job. I guess what we'd be looking to do is to provide tools in there that can assist property managers with the amount of work they got to get through in a day. Maybe AI will come to be able to assist in that, and some other technology processes. I think that'll be important going forward. Education, unquestionably. This is something that you've now allowed me to get onto my hobby horse here, but if you go back 30 years ago, maybe not even 30 years ago, if you wanted to be a real estate agent, you had to go to TAFE for 3 years. If you want to be a real estate agent now, you can do it in a week. Now, I can't work this out, so maybe you can help me. 30 years ago, it was far less complex than it is now, and you had to do 3 years. It is far more complex now, and yet you can do it in a week. And how does that work? Now, the Office of Fair Trading have said that you should have a working knowledge of 21 pieces of legislation. 21. Not a hope would you be able to understand 21 pieces of legislation, the training on that in under a week. That is insane. Now, you say to yourself, well, it doesn't really matter. They sit in the seat and away they go. Unfortunately, as you know, it's a very complicated industry. It's an industry with a lot of demands. And as a consequence of being underskilled, there is an 80% churn in the first year, just in the first
80%.
80%. 80% of the people come
Agents, property managers, both.
Everybody.
Everyone.
80% of people entering the industry leave in the first 12 months because they're underprepared, underskilled, don't know what they're doing. It's hard, and they think, I've only invested a week in this, I don't need it.
I'm happy you raised that, because you hear a lot of talk banded around crises. So there's a rental crisis, there's a affordability crisis, there's a housing crisis. I'd say that's probably a pretty significant crisis alone. 80% churn. So if every person attracted into real estate, we retain 20% of them.
Well, no. We retain 20% of them in the first year.
In the first year.
There's another bleed off in the second year, but obviously nowhere near as much.
I'd say that's probably the real crisis, because all we're doing then is eroding the capabilities of the sector that supports tenants, property investors, and also vendors. Yeah.
So that's
How does that go down with the fair tradings when you talk to them about that?
Yeah, I mean,
they'd have to be conscious of that.
They are conscious of it. They, I think, would like to see the education side of things improved, because at the end of the day, the more skilled you are, the more competent you are, then the better service you bring to the consumer. Now, the organisation I represent, the Real Estate Institute, we have the view that what is good for the consumer is good for the market and is good for the property services industry. So again, we take a holistic view. So that's where we start. So we want to see consumers getting a wonderful the best service that they can receive, and then that flows down. Everybody wins. But unfortunately, if you're pumping people out there that just don't know what they're doing, that's not going to happen. We've got a system in Australia, mutual recognition. So if you do a course somewhere and you then get licensed in that state, you can then jump over the border and under mutual recognition ask to be licensed in another state. Now, in New South Wales, the education is higher than in other locations. So people will go to the location that is the easiest. They do the course there. They apply for their licence there. Never ever practice in that state, but jump across the border and get licensed here. And so, firstly, you've had no training at all in New South Wales, and you've done the easiest course you can, and we turn people loose on that. Now, you'd have to be saying to me, and you're raising your eyebrows, I get it, why would we do that? Well, because of competition, because we don't want to see barriers to entry, this sort of stuff. It's ridiculous. What we want to see are competent people that want a career in real estate, and we want to support those people. We want them doing a good job for their clients. Now, that's what I want. What does everybody else want?
You know, to think back to 5 years ago when the onset of COVID, the accounting sector in many ways were acknowledged and recognised as the doctors and nurses of Australian business. That they were able to interpret what was going on in the world and be the voice of government in terms of ensuring the provision of any incentives are coming out. They did a great job, right? And they're highly qualified professional people. They've got university degrees, and then they might have some other endorsement, whether it's CA, CPA, or some sort of IPA endorsement. Years and years and years and years of education. If the property services professional cohort provide the same role in and around real estate, and let's say how important real estate is to the Australian economy, right?
Yep.
It is where most Australians hold their wealth, and it pretty much is the basis of the integrity of our banking system and our banks, where most people hold their superannuation inside of it, right? We're eroding the property services economy by not attracting and retaining the best and brightest people through educational deficiencies. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah,
that's probably not that good.
No, it's dreadful. And if you had $1 million and you put it in the bank, somebody and the bank said, "Look, there's a guy that's had less than a week's training, but they're going to take care of your $1 million," you would be, I would have thought, somewhat concerned.
Yeah.
But you have somebody that's had less than a week's education taking care of your $1 million rental, and that apparently is okay. I think that's appalling, and I think government needs to step up here and drive higher standards of education.
Yeah, and I think also the government really, and this comes back to a productivity thing, I think the government is so entrenched, the government, I'm being general there, state, federal, local, so entrenched in doing things as has always been done, still very antiquated, the property services industry, the way it gets done, particularly around the way rents are paid and transacted in Australia through trust accounts. We won't go too much into that today. But there is such a huge opportunity to embrace change in and around real estate, where we can champion the skills and capabilities of the individuals through AI and technology and make it a really attractive proposition to build a career out. I might just, for the sake of it, so I can go get a real estate license in a week. I can be a licensed real estate agent in a week.
Not licensed.
No.
You would get your certificate in a week, depending on which RTO you went to.
Yeah.
There's on Facebook, you see the ads all the time. There's for about $290.
I get a certificate in whatever I need to get a certificate in.
Yeah. You won't be the first journalist to have done that.
Okay.
There's been other journalists to show how poor the training is. They've gone out and done a course and then wrote an article on it. I think a young lady from the Telegraph, Kirsten Craze, did it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's and what this is for the voice of property investors in Australia. We want the most talented individuals looking after our most important assets for wealth creation. So we're right behind the property manager sector, and I think a lot more can be done to be supporting them. But yeah, this comes back to the point around these changes in the Rental Tenancy Act. It is shaping the attitudes of investors in New South Wales. And from what I'm hearing from you, there is less investors in New South Wales today than what there might have been. It's going south rather than north, correct?
So we are at best holding our own. So the amount that's coming in, the same amount is going out. So I've been tracking the numbers now for about 2 years, and we've probably gained about 2,000 or 3,000 rentals, which sounds great. But you have to realise that we are taking in 15,000 immigrants every month. There's 15,000 immigrants coming into New South Wales every month, not Australia. That's a far bigger number, but into New South Wales, 15,000 a month. So you've got 2 years. You've got 2 years of total gain of 3,000 properties, and you've got 15,000 people per month coming in. Do the numbers.
So for REINSW, if you had a wish list with 3 key things on it, and what you put up was actually accepted by the property services industry, which is very diverse, as we've spoken about, what would they be, Tim?
Yeah. So for the property services industry, I would want skills. We want to see an improved education and ongoing education. So continuing professional development. And as I was once told, it's no weight to carry. Having all those skills is no weight to carry when you walk down the street, but it is very valuable. If you can do something in a complex area for somebody else and they need that service, that has a value. So you can't be too smart in this area, and for that matter, probably in a lot of other areas. I want to see the politics come out of the property market. It's demonising. Landlords is merely an example of it. So let's get the politics out of it. Let's look at the problem sensibly. Let's look at the barriers to bringing more supply in, and stop blaming each other, and get on with it. Now, it isn't going to get fixed quickly. I get it, but we're staggering around here like a drunken sailor without a direction.
What I don't understand, Tim, is 100 years ago, someone had the vision to actually build the Harbour Bridge, which was way too big for what we needed at that point in time. What we see today is Band-Aids, and you talk about removing politics. I'm putting politics into it, but all we see is consecutive Band-Aid solutions to try and remedy something that's right in front of us rather than planning for the future. And I haven't seen anyone bold and ambitious enough to actually come out and shape what that is, because you're always going to have politics in and around property when all we're doing is trying to legislate for today or tomorrow. We're not thinking 10, 20, 30 years down the pathway. And I can't see it changing is the problem. So who is out there actually with big, bold, ambitious plans for increasing supply in Australia?
No one.
It's not happening.
I have not heard any of that. Now you see both federal and state talking about we are going to build 2,000 something properties, and that sounds great. But when they talk they're actually talking about the developer community, and they were going to do that to the best of their ability anyway. And there's all these roadblocks in there for the developers to do it. And now when it takes longer to get yes than it takes to build it, there is something fundamentally wrong with that. And I cannot believe that we are not going in and attacking that. Taxation, as we spoke a little earlier about, a tax event should be a consequence of a transaction, not a consideration. All right? So you and I have come to work today. We know we've got to pay tax on our income. Didn't stop us. But people are making decisions about transacting property based on tax. Because if you're an empty nester and you would be happier to have a property that better responds to your world, but you're looking at it saying, it's going to cost me $60,000 in stamp duty, I won't do it. So you can see that it is a consideration. Now that makes it a very bad tax. We've seen where land tax have actually closed businesses. I remember there was one up the Northern Beaches. when the land tax went up and the tenant had to pay the land tax, they said, I'll go broke doing it, handed the keys in. Shutting businesses, is that a good tax? What they did, they being government, very quietly last year, relatively quietly, is took away the indexation of land tax. So learning their lessons from stamp duty, where the indexation was removed, if you will, or not applied, back in 1986. In 1986, those tax rates, hadn't changed up until recently, and they're only been adjusted to CPI now. So the harm that they're doing continues. Now, if you read the second reading speech of back in 1986, yes, I know I'm a very sad individual, but if you go and read the second reading speech, the Treasurer of the day said, don't worry about the higher rates of tax. Don't worry about that, because they'll only apply to those ridiculously expensive properties of $350,000. So, not a problem. But they didn't do anything about it, and now you know where $350,000 is. But they've done the same thing now with land tax. They're just very quietly they've taken away the indexation. They sit back, and as the property prices increase and the land tax threshold doesn't, more and more properties will be captured, and there you go.
Property owners are an easy target for tax receipts in Australia.
Yeah.
That again is a national sport. It's how the governments, largely state-based governments, fill their coffers in order to provide the services they provide, which is okay. The biggest issue is when you see wastage and productivity is the key problem I have. I don't mind paying tax, but when I see productivity, you see what's happening in America right now around productivity and looking deeper into how money is spent. Whether it's going to go that way here in Australia, who knows? But property investors and the property economy provides
enormous
of the
sums
coffers
of money
inside of it, right? So it's hard to remove politics from it, and everyone's now saying that, and I've been saying it probably for 6 months. This upcoming federal election is going to be fought and won on housing policy. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yep.
That's the reality of the world.
Yeah, and you will hear during this debate that we're going to build this amount, and supply is the problem. And then somebody will talk about negative gearing being the curse of first home buyers. The reality of it is that when you've got 50 people down the street trying to buy one property, 49 people are going to be unhappy.
Yeah.
That's our problem.
That's how it works. So the change of the Rental Tenancy Act, no grounds eviction, pets, when does that come in place?
Government hasn't shared that with me yet, but it is coming in, and I would anticipate, say mid-April. That's an educated guess. Okay, mid-April, I would have thought.
And do you think people will not invest in property in New South Wales as a result of these changes?
Two things. I would say it's certainly not going to drive investment that we desperately need. It will deter existing investors out of the market.
Yep.
And that's not good for tenants. It will do that. How many will leave? I don't know. We've got them leaving now, but I'm really concerned about tenants.
And this is the second and third order effect of these changes, because if there's less transactions taking place in the Australian market, guess what? There's less stamp duty getting paid. If there's less investors in the market who have multiple properties, guess what? There's less land tax being paid. So this all extrapolates out. And I'll conclude with this question. Why is it that the voice of the tenant is so much stronger than the voice of the landlord in shaping and influencing government decision-making? Where do the tenancy groups or bodies get their dough from in order to have such a big voice?
Yeah, it's a great question from government. Government funds the tenancy bodies.
So this is another great irony, isn't it? So the government funds the tenancy bodies, but the government doesn't fund the investment, the voice of the investor.
No.
Does it fund you guys? Do you get
no, not a penny.
No.
But it was interesting during COVID. I remember the then minister said, "Well, I'm going to give these bodies an extra $2.5 million," and I think there was 2 tranches of that. But we said, "Well, what about landlords?" And there was something of a snicker and no. You're not getting a penny, which I found really disappointing because the landlords were making this enormous and very generous reduction in rent. They had to do it to support their tenants.
These are the same landlords that said if the tenant couldn't pay, they still had to. They couldn't evict them from the premises. They got just no rent for the period of time.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems a bit one-sided.
It is
somehow. And I know a lot of people say that because it's around for property investment. But
I'll just say one further thing about property that again people dismiss or don't consider, the property being able to live in an area enables you to work in that area. So if you can't live there, you can't work there. Now, what happened and this is just by way of example, what happened during COVID was a very interesting exercise up in Byron Bay. So because the regional areas didn't have the restrictions on them that the city did, a number of people moved up to Byron. They either bought or they rented or what have you. And there was, I think there was 36% increase in the median house price in Byron during COVID. But what happened was the people that work in the retail area, in hospitality, and those folks, they couldn't afford to live there. So they got squeezed out of town. Mm. So those people with the significant wealth went down to the coffee shop and there was no one to serve them. And there was nobody in the retail area. Now, when you think about that and you bring in our essential services guys, our fireys, our police, paramedics, if they can't live in our area, well, you know what that means. And so it is about the fabric of our society here. Mm. We need all of these services.
Yeah, and I don't begrudge the work that happens at all areas of property, and it's nice to be sitting there as a sort of armchair commentator saying, look at all this, and these are all things that are wrong. It's hard to get right. It's absolutely hard to get right. You need everyone working in unison towards the same objective, but it is so fragmented, this sector, and there are so many large, strong voices which are going to shape and persuade the way in which it's regulated in order to do that. What I would say is that technology can really be an enabler for shaping and changing the way in which property services work. Absolutely. We need more people in property services. We need more property managers. Doing the good bits of their jobs would be the key things, not the hard bits of their jobs. And it's an important time. For property investors and also for PMs, they can have a voice for you guys. They're like, what do they do? Is there if you want to get in front of your local members saying these rental tenancy changes ain't too good. Here's my view. Can you do something?
So we've got a microsite. I think that the smart people in my office call it. So if you go to our website, you will find a link there that will take you through to a forum where you can express your views. So it's REINSW.com.au, and if you go there, you will find a link there that will take you through. Now, what we've done is to create the ability for you to put in a few basic details, create a standard letter which you can then adopt or accept, and then you just push send, and that letter will go off to your local member.
Okay.
So when you put in your postcode, it knows who your local member is, and the smart little thing sends it straight off to your local member.
See, your local member might not even know a lot of these changes. They've got so many things to deal with. They need rental stock inside of their electorates to house the people who you spoke about there. We need to provide housing for Aussies.
And again, people don't realise that if I have Commonwealth shares or I don't, it doesn't really impact the society within I live. But if people can't live where in a particular area, then that area loses those services, and that does impact everybody. And this is what I've said about the rental crisis. We might say, I own my own home, all good with me. It doesn't matter. Yes, it does. If you want to be able to enjoy a variety of services, you have to have those people living in your community. And right now, that's under threat.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for coming in, Tim. That's Tim McKibbin, CEO of Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. Go and check these guys out and some of the work that they're doing. Thanks for being a voice for all sides of the property investment sector. You seem to enjoy it and passionate about it. So,
I love the job, mate. I really do. It's been a privilege to date, and I hope it'll drag on for a few more years.
Yeah, no, we'll certainly get you back in. Anytime there's updates in New South Wales, you guys are going to be my turn to for getting that updated. You can go and learn more about the changes of the Rental Tenancy Act, smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Lots there. If you want to follow us on social media, just search Smart Property. You'll track us down. And please keep those reviews coming. If there's any other guests that you want me to get on, let the team know. Editor at smartpropertyinvestment.com.au will do that. And any questions you've got, we can put it to Tim and his crew as well. Send them through there. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again next time. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.